Hey, it's Wendy V here. I am a social impact strategist. I help you make an impact through your business or your nonprofit and build your legacy of success. I am here to tell you about how to do a needs and resource scan. There's a couple of components that I went over in a recent workshop, and I want to make sure that this information is out there if you have a grant application, if you are starting a new program or product or service that helps others and serves others. A needs assessment is the very first step that you need to take. I wanted to give you some concrete ways from the workshop that I recently did to take this idea of needs assessment and use it to grow your impact for your business or your nonprofit. If you have a social business that is trying to help others, this is extremely important because it's not only about your customers, but it's also who you're serving through your impact mission. If you have a nonprofit and you are thinking about the services that you provide in order to help others, that is what the needs assessment will help you do. It'll help you understand the gaps that you fill and the ways that you can help others more efficiently and effectively. I love conducting needs assessments. Even when I watch these videos for myself, thinking about my business, I was able to take nuggets from them and apply them directly to what I'm doing now for planning and growing and strategically making sure that I can get to the outcomes I want to get to and make the impact that I want to make. So it depends on, sometimes on the policies and the structures and the social context that they live in. But we really do need to think about, multi-layered needs because people are not just one, one facet. They're multi-layered beings. And so we have to think about their needs at multiple levels. So when we're doing the needs assessment, we are looking at what are all those levels of needs? And then on the complementary side, we're thinking about, well, what resources exist within that broader context or within their day-to-day life? What resources or assets are there? Now, this is also getting back to thinking about the root causes and how do we address root causes as part of sustainability. So we want to make sure that we understand what resources and assets exist naturally within our communities or within people's day-to-day lives or connections that they have within their social wellness, for example. How do we know what these people need to thrive, and how do we know that they're getting it, right? They're connecting to it. So the resource scan is a little bit different from the needs assessment because sometimes you're thinking more about the needs assessment. We'll talk about data sources and different types of data. But with the resource scan, sometimes you're really trying to understand in depth the experience of the individual that you're trying to serve. So some of the things you can think about resources or assets could be services, programs, funding, agencies that are serving these groups, any other, types of assets that they have access to in their community or through the nature of the structure of their community. So if that's like mentoring programs, things that already exist. So these resources, one of the things about resources, we'll talk about the mix match between the resources and the needs, but the resource scan is allowing you to explore, well, what are the assets that we have available to us in order to connect and layer in what we're doing in the appropriate way. It also allows us to identify gaps. So competitors, if you are doing a resource scan as a solo, entrepreneur or someone who is a nonprofit who's, trying to look and see, well, an NGO, any of this, who else is serving the same group? So if this group, this population that you want to serve and focus on is being given resources of a certain type by an organization that kind of looks like you can think about that as a quote unquote competitor, right? But in the real sense, it might be that you can serve a quite different aspect of the same need. And they no longer become competitors. They more actually become an asset or an ally to what your work is. And so I put this word here in a sense that in traditional business research, we would be looking at our competitors. But I wanted you to take it with a grain of salt that this is really more thinking about, well, how do you fit in your unique niche of social entrepreneurship in order to meet the needs that exist for the population that you have? But you do need to understand the lay of the land and who else is out there. Doing your needs and resource scan is where you get to understand if there are gaps in how you're going to serve the population. So it provides you the intel that you need to do better, to make a bigger impact, to really hone in on what it is that the people need that you're trying to serve. and what you in particular need to be helping them with. So for people who are just starting out and haven't created their programming yet, this is really, really important because the needs assessment will tell you if what you're thinking the solution is actually a problem and is actually going to meet the needs of this group to solve that problem. So it could be, and I've seen this plenty of times, that we mix match what we think people need with what we just want to provide because it's easy for us to provide, or we have the resources, or we have the people or the capacity to provide. So instead, what we need to be thinking about is what do these people actually need and what resources already exist? Where are the gaps? And how do we then structure our programming and services in our niche for us to be the answer to that gap? And that gap ends up being our value proposition, right? So it's a very like, there is a business reason for this. But also, when you see people do it a lot on the business side, it looks a little different than when we're doing it on the social services, nonprofit, NGO side, because we're really, even though it's the same process, we're really trying to get to what do we put in our strategic plan, either way. So it doesn't matter what words we're using for this. We want to understand what is going to help us grow. What are we going to do to drive more influence, profit, income, impact, like all of that stuff, so that we know how we're going to get to our outcomes, right? And so when we kind of funnel all of this needs and information from our resource scan all the way down, we understand our gaps, we have our intel that we need, we can better say, okay, how do I serve? How do I better serve what I'm within the realm of what my capabilities are? I can plan for that and I can budget how much that's going to cost, right? And so then when I think about what funding is needed and I'm able to access those resources and funding and get that all of these things done in my plan, I have to evaluate my outcomes to see if my outcomes are actually meeting these needs and if I'm like filling this gap that I've identified. And so you have to then go back and see and update sometimes possibly your needs assessment in your resource scan. So this is why I drew it in a circle of sorts, because you don't want to forget this last part where you're connecting your outcomes and what you're seeing to the question, did I actually meet the need I originally intended to meet in the first place? Or did I actually meet the needs of the population I'm trying to serve? Or did I meet some completely other need that like I didn't even know was existed? Or did I meet the needs of a population, but it wasn't the population I was intending to serve?